There were 2 cakes on the kitchen counter that Saturday. One had my sister's name written in pink frosting. The other had no name at all. I stood in the hallway for a long time, looking at it. Nobody came to explain. That's when I realized something was very wrong. My name is Daniel. I was 17 at the time. My sister, Priya, was 15. We had the same birthday week, born 3 years apart, both in late October. Growing up, our parents always threw one shared party. That was the deal. One party, 2 names on the banner, 1 cake each. It wasn't perfect, but it was equal. That year, something changed. I noticed it slowly, the way you notice a smell before you can identify what it is. My mother started making phone calls in the laundry room with the door closed. My father started picking Priya up from school even though she was old enough to take the bus. Small things. Easy to dismiss. A few weeks before our birthdays, I overheard my parents talking at the kitchen table after they thought I'd gone to bed. I didn't catch full sentences, just fragments. He doesn't need to know yet. We'll explain after. It's better this way. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a surprise. Maybe something for school. But then the invitations went out. I found one on the mat. Pink envelope. Priya's name in gold lettering. A rooftop venue downtown. Dinner, live music, the works. It listed 30 names inside. Friends, cousins, neighbors. My name was not on the invitation. Not as a guest. Not as a co-host. Not at all. I asked my mother casually that evening, just mentioned I'd seen an envelope near the door. She smiled and said it was a special celebration for Priya. That this year was different. That I was older and would understand. When I asked what made this year different, she said, "We'll talk about it soon." She never brought it up again. I asked my father 2 days later. He was reading on the couch. He didn't look up. He said, "Your mother is handling it." Then he turned a page. I didn't push. I had learned, by that point, that pushing only made them retreat further. My parents were not cruel people in obvious ways. They didn't yell. They didn't say harsh things directly. But they had a way of making certain subjects disappear, of turning a conversation into a wall without you ever seeing the bricks go up. My grandmother, Nani, was the only one who looked at me differently that week. She lived with us. Had for 3 years, since my grandfather passed. She was quiet, methodical, the kind of woman who kept receipts for everything and forgot nothing. She made me tea without being asked. She sat across from me at breakfast and watched my parents with an expression I couldn't read, something between sadness and calculation. One evening, she slipped a folded piece of paper under my bedroom door. It said, "Don't react. Watch." Nothing else. No explanation. I assumed she meant the party situation. I assumed she was telling me to be patient. To not cause a scene. Looking back, she meant something much larger. The night of Priya's party, I stayed home. My parents left with Priya at 6. They said they'd be back by 11. They didn't ask if I wanted to come. They didn't acknowledge the strangeness of leaving me behind. My mother touched my shoulder on her way out and said, "There's food in the fridge." I sat at the kitchen table for a while. Then I noticed Nani was watching me from the hallway. She didn't say anything. She just nodded once, slowly, and walked to her room. I followed. She sat on the edge of her bed and opened the drawer of her nightstand. She placed a small yellow envelope on the mattress between us. She said, "Before you open that, I need you to understand that I did not know until recently. And once I knew, I did not know how to say it out loud." I looked at the envelope. She said, "There are things your parents have kept from you. Things that affect your future. I found out by accident, and I have been deciding, for several weeks, what to do about it." She paused. "I believe you deserve to know. I also believe that knowing without being careful will not help you." She pushed the envelope toward me. Inside was a single document, a photocopy of something official. I could see a heading, some numbers, a signature at the bottom. I started to read it. My hands were very still. My face, I think, was very still too. But something cold moved through me from my chest down to my feet, and it stayed there. I set the paper down. I looked at Nani. She said, "I have more. But I needed to see how you would react to this first." I thought about my mother's hand on my shoulder. The food in the fridge. The nameless cake. I thought about every conversation that had been closed off, redirected, quietly buried. I didn't ask Nani what I should do. I didn't cry. I didn't say anything for almost 2 minutes. Then I said, "How much more?" She opened the drawer again. So I stopped reacting. And I started watching. Nani's drawer was not deep. But what was inside it was. She placed 6 more documents on the bed, one at a time, like she was laying cards on a table. Slowly. Deliberately. Each one face up so I could read as she went. She didn't explain them out loud. She let me read first. The first document was the one I'd already seen, a photocopy of a trust fund statement. My grandfather had set it up before he died. It was divided into 2 portions, one for Priya, one for me. Equal amounts. The kind of thing a careful, loving man puts together so his grandchildren have something solid to stand on when they're ready. The second document was a bank amendment form. My portion had been redirected. Not closed. Not spent. Redirected, transferred into a secondary account under my mother's name, dated 14 months earlier. The reason listed on the form was a single bureaucratic phrase, beneficiary restructuring at guardian discretion. I read that phrase 3 times. I kept my face very calm. The third document was a letter, printed, not handwritten, from a private school in another city. It was addressed to my parents. It was a confirmation of enrollment for one student, Priya. Full tuition. Extracurricular package. Boarding accommodation. The letter referenced a financial transfer received. The amount matched almost exactly what had been redirected from my trust. I set it down. Nani was watching me. I said, "When does she start?" Nani said, "January." That was 3 months away. I nodded slowly and picked up the 4th document. It was a printed email thread. Nani had screen captured it and printed the pages. The thread was between my mother and someone named Armetta, who appeared to be a financial consultant. The earliest email was from 18 months ago. My mother's first message was short. "We need to talk about the restructuring. Daniel is almost 18. Once he turns 18, we lose discretionary access. We need to move before that." The reply, "Understood. I'll prepare the amendment." I turned the page. There were 11 more emails. Each one calm, professional, efficient. The language of people who are not doing something wrong, or who have convinced themselves they are not. Words like optimization and long-term planning and family priority alignment. My name appeared 4 times in the thread. Each time, it was followed by the word manageable. I was a problem being managed. I set the thread down and picked up the 5th document without being asked. This one was different. It was handwritten, my grandfather's handwriting, which I recognized from birthday cards he used to send. It was a personal note, separate from the legal trust documents. Not legally binding. Just a letter he had written and given to Nani for safekeeping. He had written it 2 years before he died. It said, among other things, "The trust is equal because they are equal. I want Daniel to know, when he is old enough, that I saw him. That I believed in him. That this is his, not a gift, not a favor, but his. Please make sure he receives it." I read that paragraph twice. Then I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my lap. Nani said nothing. She understood. The 6th document was the one that completed the picture. It was a legal summary, prepared by a private attorney, addressed to Nani. She had consulted someone quietly, on her own, without telling my parents. The summary outlined what had occurred, what was recoverable, and what the legal exposure was for the parties involved. At the bottom, the attorney had written a single note in the margin, handwritten, "Minors funds redirected without court approval. This is actionable." I sat with all 6 documents arranged in front of me on the bed. I thought about the party happening downtown at that exact moment. The pink balloons. The live music. The 30 guests. My sister, who may or may not have known any of this, laughing in a venue paid for with money that was half mine. I thought about my mother saying there's food in the fridge. I thought about my father turning the page. I wasn't angry the way I expected to be. There was something colder than anger sitting in my chest. Something that felt like clarity. I looked at Nani and said, "Did they know you had these?" She shook her head. "They forgot I keep everything." I almost smiled at that. I asked her how she found the email thread. She told me calmly, my mother had printed it at home and left the pages near the printer. Nani had picked them up thinking they were something else. When she realized what they were, she copied them and said nothing. She had been waiting. Watching. For weeks. She had been doing exactly what she told me to do before I even knew what I was watching for. I gathered the documents, stacked them neatly, and asked Nani if I could keep them overnight. She said, "I made copies. Those are yours." I went to my room. I didn't listen to music. I didn't look at my phone. I sat at my desk under the lamp and read through everything again, beginning to end, slowly and carefully. I made notes on a legal pad, dates, amounts, names, document types, the sequence of events. By the time my parents came home at 11, I was in bed with the light off. I heard my mother check on me. The door opened an inch, a pause, then closed again. I heard her say to my father in the hallway, just above a whisper, "He's asleep." My father said, "Good." They went to their room. I lay in the dark with my hands folded on my chest and the documents in the drawer beside me. I understood now. All of it. The closed doors, the redirected conversations, the nameless cake, the party I wasn't invited to. It was all connected. It was all deliberate. And it had been planned for over a year while I ate dinner with these people every night and said please and thank you and asked how their days were. I wasn't going to cry about it. I wasn't going to confront them in the hallway. I wasn't going to send a message or make a scene or give them any reason to move faster, hide more, or prepare a defense. Because the moment they knew I knew, everything would change. And I needed everything to stay exactly the same for just a little while longer. Confronting them would have ruined everything. The next morning I woke up before everyone else. I showered. I made toast. I sat at the kitchen table and read the news on my phone like nothing had happened. When my mother came downstairs, I said good morning. She said good morning back. She made tea. I asked if she slept well. She said yes. She asked the same. I said yes. We sat in the same kitchen we had sat in for 17 years and spoke like two people who had nothing to hide from each other. I was the only one acting. After breakfast I told my parents I was going to the library to study. My father nodded without looking up. My mother said to take an umbrella. I took the documents with me in a plain folder inside my backpack. I did not go to the library. The attorney's name was on the legal summary Nani had shown me. Mr. Farhan Siddiqui. His office was a 40-minute bus ride from our house, in a quiet part of the city where the buildings were modest and the signs were small. The kind of office that didn't need to advertise because the people who needed it always found it eventually. I had called ahead from my bedroom the night before, after my parents went to sleep. I spoke quietly. I gave my name, my age, and a one-sentence summary of the situation. The receptionist asked if I could come in the next day. I said yes. I arrived 7 minutes early. Mr. Siddiqui was a small man in his late 50s. Grey at the temples. Reading glasses on a chain. He shook my hand and gestured to the chair across from his desk without making me feel young or small or like I was wasting his time. I placed the folder on his desk. I said, "My grandmother already contacted you. These are the original copies." He opened the folder. He read in silence for several minutes. He did not react dramatically. He turned pages the way someone turns pages when they already know roughly what they are looking at and are simply confirming details. When he finished, he folded his hands on the desk. He said, "Your grandmother told me the outline. This confirms it." He paused. "You're 17. I said yes. He said, "You turn 18 in how long?" I said, 6 weeks. He nodded slowly. "That's actually useful. It means certain options are cleaner if we wait a short period. But it also means we need to move carefully now, so nothing else disappears before then. He explained the situation in plain language, which I appreciated. My grandfather's trust had been legally established with both my name and Priya's as equal beneficiaries. To redirect my portion, my parents would have needed either my consent, which they didn't have because I didn't know, or a court order authorizing guardian discretion over a minor's inheritance. There was no court order. There had never been a court order. What there was a financial consultant who had processed the amendment quietly, possibly without fully verifying the legal requirements, possibly knowing exactly what he was doing. Either way, the amendment was invalid. The funds were still traceable. And the paper trail was sitting in a folder on Mr. Siddiqui's desk. He said, "The question is what outcome you want." I had thought about this the night before. For a long time. I said, I want the money returned to its original structure. I want documentation of what happened filed with the appropriate authority. And I want it done in a way that cannot be reversed or quietly settled before I turn 18. He looked at me for a moment. He said, "That's a very measured answer for someone your age." I said, "I had a good grandfather." He almost smiled. We spent the next hour going through the documents systematically. He photographed each one with a small scanner on his desk. He made notes. He asked me precise questions and I gave him precise answers. When he asked how I'd obtained the documents, I told him the truth. My grandmother had gathered them and given them to me voluntarily. He noted that it mattered, legally. Before I left, he said he would need to contact the trust's original registering institution, the bank where my grandfather had set it up. He would also be filing a formal inquiry with the Financial Regulatory Authority regarding the consultant, Ara Mehta. That process would move quietly, on paper, through official channels. He said my parents would not be notified until the inquiry reached a stage where notification was legally required. I asked when that would be. He said, approximately 3 to 4 weeks. I thanked him. I shook his hand. I left. On the bus ride home, I did 3 things. First, I photographed every document again with my phone and emailed the images to an account my parents didn't know existed, one I had created the night before using Nani's tablet. Second, I wrote a clear, chronological summary of everything I knew and everything I had done so far, and I saved it in 2 places, the cloud account and a USB drive I bought from a small shop near the bus stop. Third, I sent Nani a single message on the phone she kept for herself, the one my parents rarely noticed. "It's done. Thank you." She replied 4 minutes later, "Your grandfather would be proud." I put my phone away and watched the city move past the window. The following weeks were the strangest of my life. On the surface, everything was normal. I went to school. I came home. I did homework at the kitchen table. I ate dinner with my family. I asked Priya about her friends. I helped my father carry groceries. I watched television with my mother on Thursday evenings the way we always had. Internally, I was tracking everything. I noticed when my mother made calls in the laundry room, fewer now, which meant either things were settled in her mind or she was moving to a different method of communication. I noticed when my father came home later than usual 2 Tuesdays in a row. I noticed the way Nani watched me at breakfast, steady and calm, and how I watched her back the same way. We never discussed it at home. Not once. We didn't need to. Mr. Siddiqui called me once during that period, on the private number I'd given him. He confirmed that the bank had responded to his inquiry. The original trust records were intact. The redirect was flagged. A formal notice had been issued to Ara Mehta's firm. The process was moving exactly as intended. He said, "You should be prepared for things to become less quiet in the next week or so." I said I was prepared. I was not entirely prepared. But I was as ready as I could be. 3 days before everything came to a surface, I came downstairs to find my parents sitting at the kitchen table together at an unusual hour, mid-afternoon, when my father was normally at work. They were not arguing. They were very still. There was a piece of paper on the table between them. I recognized the letterhead at the top. It was from the Financial Regulatory Authority. My mother looked up at me. For a moment, Just a moment, something moved across her face. Not guilt, exactly. Something more complicated than that. Something that looked almost like the beginning of an explanation she didn't yet have words for. I said, "Is everything okay?" She said, "Yes. Just some paperwork." She turned the letter face down. I nodded and poured myself a glass of water and went back upstairs. I sat on my bed and sent Mr. Siddiqui a message. "They've received something." He replied within minutes. "Good. Stay calm." Wednesday. Wednesday was 4 days away. My parents moved through the house that evening like people carrying something heavy they were trying not to show. My father was quieter than usual at dinner. My mother laughed once at something Priya said, but it was slightly too loud and ended slightly too quickly. Nani watched all of it. I watched all of it. Nobody said anything that mattered. And when I went to bed that night, I lay in the dark and listened to the house settle around me. The pipes, the wind, the ordinary sounds of a home that was about to change, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not satisfaction. Not excitement. Just readiness. They were living inside a version of events that had already ended. They just didn't know it yet. They thought it was just another day. It wasn't. Wednesday came the way important days always do. Quietly. Ordinarily. Like any other morning. I woke up at 6:40. I showered. I dressed carefully, not formally, but neatly. The kind of clothes you wear when you want to feel steady. I came downstairs and made tea and sat at the kitchen table and waited. Nani was already awake. She was sitting in her chair near the window with her hands folded in her lap. She had also dressed carefully. She looked at me when I came in and gave one small nod. We didn't speak. My parents came down at 7:30. My mother was in her robe. My father had his work clothes on, which meant he was planning to leave. He poured coffee. She opened the refrigerator and stood looking into it without taking anything out. Normal. Completely normal. At 8:15, the doorbell rang. My father answered it. I stayed at the kitchen table. I heard voices in the hallway, my father's, and 2 others. Measured. Professional. The tone of people who do difficult things regularly and have learned to do them without drama. Mr. Siddiqui had arranged for 2 people to be present, a representative from the Financial Regulatory Authority, a woman named Ms. Okafor, and a family law advocate named Mr. Reyes, who was there specifically in my capacity as the affected minor. Mr. Siddiqui himself arrived 30 seconds after them. I heard my father say, "I don't understand what this is about." Mr. Siddiqui said, calmly, "If we could all sit down, we can explain everything clearly." They came into the kitchen. My mother turned from the refrigerator. She saw Mr. Siddiqui first. Then Ms. Okafor. Then Mr. Reyes. Then she saw me, sitting at the table with my hands around my mug of tea, watching her. Something shifted in her face. A slow rearrangement. Not collapse. My mother was not the kind of person who collapsed, but a quiet, careful recognition. The kind that happens when you understand, in a single moment, that a situation you thought you controlled has been out of your control for longer than you realized. She sat down. My father remained standing for a moment. Then he sat too. Priya was still upstairs. Nobody called her down. This was not her meeting. She was 15. Whatever her parents had told her, or not told her, she was not part of what had been done. I had been clear about that with Mr. Siddiqui from the beginning. Whatever happened here, Priya was not responsible. Ms. Okafor spoke first. She had a calm, unhurried voice. She placed a folder on the table and opened it without rushing. She explained, in precise and simple language, what the inquiry had found. The original trust. The amendment. The absence of a court order. The transfer of funds. The timeline. She did not editorialize. She did not accuse. She stated facts in the order they occurred, the way someone reads coordinates from a map. My father interrupted once. He said the amendment had been handled by a professional and that they had been advised it was within their rights. Ms. Okafor said, that advice was incorrect, and the professional who gave it is currently under a separate inquiry. That is being handled independently. My father did not interrupt again. My mother said nothing throughout. She kept her eyes on the table mostly, occasionally glancing at me with an expression I found difficult to categorize. It wasn't anger. It wasn't quite shame. It was something more private than either, the look of a person confronting the distance between who they believed themselves to be and what the documents on the table said they had done. Mr. Reyes spoke next. He outlined my legal standing. He explained that as the affected beneficiary, I was entitled to full restoration of the redirected funds to the original trust structure. He explained that because I was turning 18 within weeks, the restoration would transfer directly into my control upon that date, properly and legally, with full documentation. He also explained that my parents had a choice in how the next steps proceeded. Option 1. Full voluntary cooperation with the restoration process, formal acknowledgement of the unauthorized amendment, and compliance with the regulatory authority's requirements. This path avoided court proceedings. Option 2, non-cooperation, which would move the matter into civil litigation, which would be longer, more expensive, more public, and would carry additional legal exposure for both my parents and our matter. Mr. Reyes said this without emphasis. Just information. 2 doors. Their choice which one to open. My father looked at my mother. My mother looked at her hands. Then she looked at me. She said, quietly, "Daniel." I waited. She said, "I want you to know that we were going to tell you." I didn't respond to that. Not because I wanted to be cruel, but because I had nothing useful to say to it, and I had learned, over the past several weeks, that silence was often more honest than words. Mr. Siddiqui said gently, "Perhaps that conversation is one for another time. For now, we need a decision." My father said, "We'll cooperate." He said it to the table. Not to me. My mother nodded once. The paperwork took most of the morning. Ms. Okafor was thorough. Every form was explained before it was signed. Every signature was witnessed. The restoration order was formalized. The regulatory filing was completed. Our Metas firm would face its own separate consequences. That process was already in motion and didn't require anything further from me. Around noon, Ms. Okafor and Mr. Reyes gathered their folders, shook hands with Mr. Siddiqui, and left. Mr. Siddiqui stayed for a few minutes. He shook my hand at the door and said, "The restoration will be confirmed in writing within 10 business days. After your birthday, you'll have full access." I thanked him. He said, "Your grandfather set up a good document. Very clear intentions." I said, "He was a careful man." Mr. Siddiqui nodded and left. I went back inside. My parents were still at the kitchen table. The folders were gone. The chairs were still slightly pulled out from where everyone had been sitting. My father had his head in his hands. My mother was looking out the window at the garden. Nani was still in her chair near the window. She had not moved during the entire meeting. She had not been asked to speak and she had not offered to. She had simply been present, the way she was always present, still, observant, unignorable. I sat down across from my parents. I didn't have a speech prepared. I hadn't wanted one. Speeches are for people who need to be heard. I had already been heard, by the documents, by the process, by everyone who needed to hear it. I said, "I don't want to talk about it today." My mother looked at me. Her eyes were red at the edges. She said, "Okay." My father lifted his head. He looked older than he had that morning. He said, "I'm sorry, Daniel." A pause. "That isn't enough." "I know it isn't." I said, "No. It isn't." He nodded. I said, "But it's a place to start." I meant that. I wasn't being generous to make them feel better. I meant it because I was 17 and these were still my parents, and I understood, in some complicated way that I couldn't fully articulate yet, that people make choices that are wrong without becoming entirely unreachable. That what had been done was serious and real and had required real consequences. And that those consequences had now been put in place, properly, through the right channels, with documentation and authority and no shouting. I had not raged. I had not threatened. I had not sent a single angry message or made a single accusation without evidence behind it. I had watched. I had gathered. I had moved carefully and quietly and with help from someone wiser than me who had believed in me without being asked to. And now it was done. That afternoon, Priya came downstairs not knowing anything specific had happened. She could feel the atmosphere, teenagers always can, but she didn't ask. She made herself a sandwich and sat with us for a while and talked about something at school, something ordinary, and we all listened and responded the way families do. I watched her and felt nothing complicated about her. She was my sister. She was 15. She had been given things that weren't entirely hers to be given, but she hadn't taken them knowingly. That distinction mattered to me. Whatever conversations my parents needed to have with her were theirs to have. That evening I went to Nani's room. She was sitting on her bed reading. She looked up when I came in. I sat beside her. I said, "Thank you." She set her book down. She said, "I kept my promise to your grandfather. That's all." I thought about his handwriting on that letter. I saw him. I believed in him. I thought about how a person can love you forward in time, past their own life, through a piece of paper in a drawer, through a woman who remembers everything and throws nothing away. I didn't say any of that out loud. I just sat with Nani for a while in the quiet of her room, and she picked her book back up, and I looked out the window at the evening settling over the garden, and everything felt exactly as heavy and as light as it actually was. No more. No less. My birthday came 6 weeks later. No party. No pink frosting. No venue. Nani made me tea in the morning. She placed my grandfather's handwritten letter on the table beside the cup. She said, "Yours. Always was." I folded it carefully and put it in my pocket. The trust restoration was confirmed 3 days after I turned 18. Full amount. Original structure. Clean documentation. My name on it, the way my grandfather had intended. I didn't celebrate. I didn't tell anyone outside of what had already been handled. I just filed it away, properly, and made a note to myself to write Mr. Siddiqui a thank you letter. A real one, on paper. The kind my grandfather would have written. My parents and I were not the same after that morning. We were something more careful, more honest in a quiet way, not repaired, not broken, but different. Changed by the weight of what had been uncovered and what had been chosen afterward. It would take time. I knew that. I was willing to give it time. Some things don't resolve cleanly. Some things just shift, slowly, into something more livable. And you learn to tell the difference between wounds that need silence and wounds that need air. This one needed both, at different moments, in different measures. I was learning. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept without thinking. No documents to review. No timelines to track. No careful silences to maintain. Just the dark, and the quiet, and the ordinary sounds of a house settling into itself. That night, everything was quiet.